I guess it doesn't really matter what you do when the lights are the brightest and you're trying to make a name for yourself after you've been given the opportunity. You make one mistake that really wasn't even your fault, and the media will be quick to call you a failure. When I was younger, watching the news used to be one of the only things that you could do as a family. Sure, there were other things to watch, but the news, that's where it was at. As I grew up though, I realized that each different news station, especially the news stations that were on cable, tended to shape the stories according to their own beliefs, regardless of how many times they would claim to be impartial. So eventually, I made the decision to stop watching it altogether. And you know what? My life was better for it. I could get my own news by doing my own research, and from that I could form my own beliefs. And then one day, near the end of the 2022 NFL season, a close friend of mine told me I needed to check out a show called Undisputed. He told me that the host was talking some crazy stuff and that I needed to check it out just for a laugh. So I turned it on and watched the segment he wanted me to watch, and dang it, I was hooked. I didn't want to be, but there was something about the show that I found entertaining. And I realized quite quickly that this show was very pro-Cowboys, mostly because Skip Bayless was a longtime Cowboy fan and a former beat writer for the team. In short, the show had a clear bias, but I still watched certain segments, mostly kept it on in the background. Unfortunately, that did lead me to search up clips of the show from YouTube, which of course altered my algorithm, which led me to start getting recommendations for other FS1 shows like Speak. And of course, first things first. Speak, for the most part, was relatively unbiased, with a slight lean toward the Eagles and Packers stories, given that 3 of the hosts were former players that played for those teams. But it was first things first that really captured my attention. The 3 hosts had insane chemistry. But, as all shows do, I realized that the show had a bias toward the Kansas City Chiefs, and I would also discover that it was more about hot takes than anything else. It really left me wanting for more content based on the team that I liked. And so, in order to do that, I decided to search up some content on YouTube that was more focused on the 49ers, which led me to discover content creators like Larry Krueger, Damon Bruce, Brad Graham, and of course, the person that Niner fans love to hate, Grant Cohn. And while the content was good, it was actually Grant that I gravitated toward because he would give what I thought at the time was the most honest take. That's when Brock Purdy's injury happened. Man, you want to talk about a 180. A few short weeks before the injury, when the Niners played Seattle, everyone was praising him as the next big quarterback.
Brock Purdy is the 49ers franchise quarterback. It's over. It's his job. Forget about it. You're not taking it from him.
Some were even daring enough to call him the modern-day Joe Montana that could do the impossible and become the first rookie quarterback to not only start a Super Bowl, but win it. That's how good he was playing. After the Eagles game, though, suddenly he was nothing more than the last pick in the draft that got carried to the playoffs by the best roster in the NFL. He truly was Mr. Irrelevant.
Yeah. So what's it going to be like
To me,
after? We don't know.
He is a backup quarterback, a high-level backup, a high-level backup.
And that's when I realized that I had fallen into the trap that I had told myself long ago to watch out for, because I began to think to myself, maybe that's really all he is. And then I started watching more segments from the shows I mentioned earlier, and they were all saying the same thing. Well, of course the Niners couldn't beat the Eagles. They didn't have a superstar quarterback. Or can we finally put the Brock Purdy story to rest? Or Brock Purdy is nothing more than an average quarterback who got carried to the playoffs by the same team and coach that made Jimmy Garoppolo look good. It felt a little disrespectful, if I'm being completely honest. Little did I know, though, that was just the beginning. With Purdy's injury being as severe as it was and requiring surgery, suddenly the narrative switched from Brock Purdy looks like the future of the franchise to Brock Purdy simply isn't that guy. And it was made worse during the offseason because instead of doing what normal quarterbacks do, building chemistry with his receivers, getting more reps to improve his mechanics, etc., he had to spend his entire offseason rehabbing his elbow. It's interesting when you think about it. During his first training camp, He was a third string rookie that got no reps with the starters, and during his first full offseason after he became the starting quarterback, he couldn't get reps with the starters because he was rehabbing. So when you hear the media start talking about how Brock Purdy hadn't yet had to face adversity, you kind of had to sit back and laugh, because not being able to practice your craft with your teammates really does seem like adversity to me. Never mind the fact that you were already facing scrutiny for being the last pick in the draft. But I digress. As far as they were concerned, Brock Purdy was a flash in the pan, and while it was a good story, he simply wasn't good enough. Some of the more common themes I heard when people were discussing Purdy were, he's too small. Brock Purdy is listed as 6'1", and yet somehow that makes him tiny. But if you were to ask these same people about Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, Tua Tagovailoa, or Caleb Williams, suddenly their height is just fine and doesn't hinder them. Brock Purdy is also listed at 220 pounds, and he's called too light. But if you were to ask these same people about, again, Jalen Hurts or Trevor Lawrence or Matthew Stafford or Baker Mayfield, suddenly their weight doesn't make a difference. And I think my personal favorite is that Brock Purdy has tiny hands. They're only 9¼ inches. But I wonder if anyone has ever told Patrick Mahomes that he has tiny hands. It doesn't really seem to matter when it comes to him. Now, before anyone accuses me of directly comparing these quarterbacks to each other, I'm not. I'm simply pointing out that there is a direct double standard when it comes to describing the attributes of Brock Purdy as being a hindrance to his performance versus those same attributes shared by other quarterbacks that are seen as better than Purdy. And the same goes for other arguments against him that the media loves to bring up. He's not the fastest. He has a weak arm. He needs everything around him to be perfect in order for him to succeed. It gets to the point where as you listen to members of the media keep rehashing the same arguments over and over and over again, that it begins to sound very familiar. If we're really being honest though, there's one major difference between those other quarterbacks that I mentioned and Purdy. It's that those quarterbacks were drafted much, much higher than he was. What's funny is that there are some people in the media that will actually tell the truth and tell you straight up that people look down on him because of his draft status, which, if I'm being honest, makes me respect them just a bit more. Do I wish they could actually get past his draft status and look at what he's done in his first season instead? Sure, but most people simply can't get past their own bias, which brings us back to the offseason. Everyone was waiting to see what was going to happen with the starting quarterback position. Purdy was rehabbing his elbow, Trey Lance was finally healed and ready to play, and Kyle Shanahan brought in a third quarterback as a possible starter/backup, one Sam Darnold. The media had a field day with this because many fans were hoping that the Niners were finally going to have an offseason where there would be no quarterback controversy. And it got so much worse when before the regular season even started, it was announced that Trey Lance would be traded to the Dallas Cowboys for a 4th-round pick, and that Brock Purdy, after recovering from major elbow surgery, would be the official starting quarterback. Let's break that down for a moment. The quarterback of the team spent 3 first-round picks and an additional 3rd-round pick was being traded for a 4th-round pick to a rival team, and it was decided that the quarterback that was drafted dead last was a better choice. And that's why I mentioned in a previous episode that I believe it was this decision that turned media members off of Brock Purdy. He was essentially paying for the sins of the team that drafted him. Now, perhaps that sounds too dramatic, but it's really how I feel. Fans of Trey Lance, especially in the media, just couldn't get over the fact that he was never given a real chance to prove himself and instead lost a starting job to a player they deemed inferior. And that's totally fair. The only problem with that was that we were about to start game 1 of the 2023 season, and the media was ready to pounce. And it certainly didn't help that the first team that Purdy and the Niners were going to face were the Pittsburgh Steelers, who just happened to have a quarterback drafted in the same year as Purdy. In fact, it just so happened to be the first quarterback that was drafted that year. And that's going to do it for this video. If you like this content, drop a like and leave a comment. To stay up to date, click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see ya in the next one.